Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again with another video in my Malazan Beautiful Scenes analysis series. Today we're looking at the first scene I'm going to cover from either of Steven Erikson's books in his Kharkanas trilogy, the prequel trilogy to Mr. Erikson's more famous 10-volume epic, Malazan Book of the Fallen. If you haven't checked out any of my scene analyses on moments from that series, the 10-book series, they're all in a playlist with this one, and feel free to watch any or all of those up to where you've read in the series, and or to your, your comfort level with spoilers and that sort of thing. All that said, today we're looking at a moment from past the halfway point in the first book of this prequel trilogy, Forge of Darkness. The scene in question is in chapter 14, pages 513 to 517 in this Tor mass market paperback. All that needs to be known to set the scene is that Kadaspala is a painter often commissioned to paint portraits of famous nobles and war heroes. He's a pretty well-respected and highly sought-after artist in the kingdom of Kurald Galain. His sister is to be wed soon, and he is writing from a recent portrait painting job, recently completed. He's writing to the location of the ceremony when he comes across slaughtered forest dwellers, families and children, and those that much of the city dwellers and higher class consider deniers, outsiders, savages. Kadaspala is not quite sure why these people have been killed, but it is terribly distressing. Anyway, he moves on from the scene of these war crimes, and we catch up with him much later after a number of other things have gone wrong for him in this journey. Here we go. Ever since the huts and their dead, and the soldiers he'd found camped further along the trail, everything had gone wrong for Kadaspala. His mule had plunged a hoof down a burrow hole and snapped its foreleg in half. The artist had toppled from the animal's back, landing awkwardly on his paint box, and then received a solid kick from the braying, thrashing beast, leaving his left thigh so bruised he could barely walk. He had considered making his way back to the soldiers, but by then they had been a half-day behind him, assuming they'd not moved on. His agitation deepened when he realized that he had lost track of the date, that he was, perhaps, at risk of arriving too late to accompany the procession from Enna's house. Once his father and sister arrived at the site of Andara's new estate, there would be 2 days of preparations before the ceremony. Even half lame and loaded down with equipment as he was, he expected to reach them before the ceremony. It was, he decided, the best he could hope for. Cutting the mule's throat had proved messy and brutal, leaving him sprayed in blood and sickened by the deed. When he looked down at his stained hands and clothes, he felt as if he had caught a curse from the denier's camp, and blood was now following him everywhere, a trail of culpability steeped in death and dying. The child's dead face returned to him, no longer ghostly, no longer sketched in the air by the fingers of one hand, but hard with accusation now. That child had made him a consort with the ending of lives. Ticed and beast, the wild into the tamed, and the tamed into the decrepit, and all was sullied, all was ruined. Okay, so this opening page or so, Erikson is mostly just setting the scene while reminding us just a little bit of the last time we saw Kadaspala and where his thinking had led him to then. In that scene, he had been thinking a lot about how, as a painter, his gods were all actually the colors of the world and the colors he used in painting. And in that scene, we could see him begin kind of raging against the world's injustices with these children dying, that sort of thing. But yes, so for this specific scene, Kadaspala has been through a lot, and before Erikson moves on to what the artist is now thinking about, he wanted to, I think, recap us and basically give us a nice transition from his thoughts on gods, colors, and dead children, and transition those thoughts into this next bit here. So here we go. Art failed reality each and every time. It failed in the essence of experience. A work could but achieve the merest hints of what was real and immediate, the tactile discomforts, the pangs of disequilibrium, the smells of endeavor, and the shaky unease of a rattled mind. It pawed bluntly at immediate truths and fumbled blindly through all the lies one told oneself in every passing instant, every eternal moment. He saw now that there was no beginning to anything, and no end either. Moments fell forward in seamless progression, and then fell behind in gathering haze. Colors washed away the moment the observing eyes lost appreciation, or they grew stark and hard when the senselessness of things struck home. He saw now, at the ends of his scraped and stung arms, one hand that etched out creation, and the other that erased it. And by these twin measures he existed, and his entire purpose in living was to insist that he was here, and that this was now, and once those hands fell still, eternally still, all that he proclaimed of himself would vanish. In his irretrievable absence, they could walk the halls between his paintings. They could walk as things of flesh and heat, blood and bone, thought and unthought, while to either side ran windows onto flattened worlds and reduced lives that were in total all Kadaspala had ever achieved. And with sharpened nail they could poke through those false worlds, and behind them find naught but mortar and stone. Okay, another break here. Kadaspala is developing this sort of kind of cynical depreciation of the value of art and his art in particular. And I think it's important to always think that think about how whenever Erikson is talking about art and the value artists have in society, I believe he's very much exploring and commenting on his own thoughts about what value his artistic novels have, what value he has as a novelist. So yeah, I think it's always important to keep that at least in the backs of our minds when we hear Kadaspala so harshly discounting artists as liars. Anyway, moving on. I have always been a liar. I cannot help what I am, and that is the first lie, the one I uttered to myself long ago. Others accepted it by virtue of my talent, and in accepting it they let me live the lie, sweet of them, and such a relief that I fooled them. And if my contempt now dogs their shadows wherever I walk in their wake, well, it is no surprise. Give me the lie and I will take it, and then give it back to you, in vibrant otherworldly colors, that godly language uttered by ungodly tongues, and yearn for the adoration in your eyes. It's what I feed on, after all. Give me what I need to keep the lies alive, to keep me alive. He kept his honest thoughts to himself, for himself. He risked nothing that way. Because if artists were liars first and foremost, in close second were they cowards. One day he would paint beauty, he would capture its essence, and once it was captured, at the pinnacle of his talent, he could lie back, close his eyes, and drift into death. He would be done and done with the world. It could have nothing left to give him, but for now, he would paint in blood. Let's pause here to think about two things. First, like I just mentioned a moment ago, Erikson saying that artists are liars. In a way they are, but rarely with the negative connotation of that word liar. So I think it's relatively easy to follow Kadaspala's train of thought on that point. And then he starts talking about beauty and how Kadaspala feels he wants to paint one final beautiful thing, but after this unfortunate journey of his and the things he's seen, he can only paint blood and horrors. I think Erikson includes this bit to make us think about whether or not the artistic portrayal of something horrific can, in its own way, hold a certain beauty. And is it sensationalizing the violence and horrors of the world to have this artistic reproduction or representation of that? Or is it merely reproducing those for others to witness? Some interesting kind of stuff there to float around in your mind while you're reading this book or any of Erikson's books. Anyway, continuing on. The trail opened ahead in tangled scrub and severed stumps, and beyond that was the raised river road. I leave the wild behind me. With all its perils of raw truth and senseless death, I step into civilization. Its shaped stones and lifeless wood, its sun-baked clay, and its crowded streets filled with furtive moments we boldly name people. If he had a free hand, his fingers would awaken to paint the scene in all its desultory glory, and so make things anew in all the old ways. If the colors are God's, then another God waits in the death of all color. In black lines and swaths of drowned light, my hand and my eye are creators of entire worlds, creators of new gods. Behold, artist as creator, and world upon world to unfurl, inscribe, delineate, destroy. Again, I think this is Erikson directly commenting on both the burden of being an artist who creates whole worlds and lives to raise up and destroy, but there's something selfish, narcissistic, and arrogant in that, at least a little bit. And I think Erikson is using the character of Kadaspala to explore where that line might be between a self-aware artist and an arrogant artist. This reads very much to me like these are issues Erikson has grappled with in getting to the bottom of his own identity and purpose as a writer. Moving on. He clambered slowly up to the road, wincing, and swung left, south, and set off. To a wedding, where beauty was offered up to the sole promise of being sullied, made mundane by mundane necessities, and the drudgery of day upon day, night upon night, the host of insipid demands that pulled flesh down, dulled the eyes, made puffy and irresolute the regard. No, he would never paint beauty. It was already too late. But the scene haunted his mind. The flower petals upon the path, tears of color already wilting and trodden upon, the bright eyes of the two now bound as one in the lascivious envy of the onlookers. Anesdia's was a transient beauty, its perfect day almost done, almost in the past, handfuls of crushed petals thrown into the river, riding the currents down and away, tree branches hanging low over the water as if weighted with sorrow, the colors watery and muted, as if seen through cold tears. A sky empty of life, the wedding of Indarist and Anesdia. If he could, if he dared, he would steal her away, lock her in a tower like some mad lover in a wretched poem fraught with twisted notions of possession. His hands alone knew the truth of her, and brother or not, he would show her every one of those truths, in pleasures she had never imagined. Oh, he knew the crimes of such thoughts, but thoughts lived well in realms of the forbidden. He'd seen as much in the eyes of every victim he painted. He could play out his defiance of taboos here in his mind as he walked this road and imagine the brush of his fingers as they painted skin and flesh, and they painted gasp and ecstasy, lurid convulsion, and spent sigh. Before his talent, everything would surrender. Everything. Okay, and here I think we get to some stuff where Erikson is peeling back the curtain and addressing some of these questions Kadaspala has been raising. It's absurd, I think, for this painter to kind of take his idea of power of his artistic creations in a figurative sense and start confusing that with any kind of power or skill he might have, romantically or sexually with his sister. And Erikson smartly makes sure Kadaspala comments on the taboo of his sexual desires with her, but Erikson also leaves this wide open for readers to kind of cringe at and say, oh no, buddy, don't do that, don't talk about your sister like that, she's about to get married. And don't mistake your power over the canvas for some untested, bizarre power over your sister in the bedroom. While the taboo is in and of itself uncomfortable, I'd say it's even more inappropriate that Kadaspala feels so confident that his love for his sister would work out well or be some kind of romantic story. So I think Erikson is using this scene to start drawing that line between the artist's understanding power of their art and an artist kind of misinterpreting and misapplying that power and thinking it applies to anything and anyone in the real world. And then finally, just to finish up the scene here, there had been riders on the road. He saw scores of hoof prints in the dust and dirt leading in both directions, but the air felt dead, empty, drained of urgency. Here and there, in faint streaks beneath the signs of riders, he saw the tracks of a carriage. He was indeed behind the procession then, but despite all the traffic suggested by the hoof prints, Kadaspala walked alone and no one else was in sight. The wedding of Indarist and Anesdia, painted with rage, the wedding of Indarist and Anesdia, erased by fury. He had the power of both, here in his hands. Such thoughts lived well in this forbidden realm. Behold, artist as God. Bruised and scraped and stung, he limped down the road beneath his burden of paints and brushes. The smell of smoke rode the wind, the smell of dying colors. So finally, at the end of the passage, as the gods of color fade and give way to the cruel realities of the world, Kadaspala is growing more and more unstable, and he's thinking he'll have to maybe sort of be the god then to paint the world between these extremes, the world that he now wants. And this is how an artist can maybe turn into a bit of a megalomaniac. Fascinating stuff. Also, before closing out this analysis, I should add that I made a lot of suppositions about Erikson's thought process as an author and his philosophy on the artist's relationship to their creations. This is all theory and conjecture, and someone could easily come along and destroy the way I've analyzed this scene. I welcome constructive discourse like that always. I'll also say, though, that I feel like these Kharkanas books in particular hold scene after scene just layered with meaning. So while I might be scratching like maybe 2 or 3 layers deep here, someone else might be looking at the 5th or 6th theme explored in this relatively brief passage. And this is just a truly outstanding book that really can inspire so much variety and analysis and conversation. So if you haven't already, please like and subscribe and share with friends so we can try and get more people talking about this brilliant sequel trilogy online. I have 5 more videos coming out all about different moments from Kharkanas. Thank you so much for watching, as always, and have a nice day. Bye.